Winter approaches across the ancient savanna. The last hunt of the season begins for these primitive ancestors. But they weren't the only hunters in this prehistoric wilderness. Ancient predators stalked the same prey. Success in this brutal hunt meant survival for the entire primitive family through the harsh season ahead. Fire brought them together in the darkness, creating bonds that would last through countless generations. 6.2 million years ago, survival was the only law that governed these ancient lives. Each dawn brought new challenges and dangers for these primitive ancestors fighting to survive. The elder sensed the approaching season with instincts honed by years of prehistoric survival. The dry season was coming fast. Food would become scarce, and starvation threatened the group. They prepared crude tools and weapons for the most important hunt of their primitive lives. Basic tools meant the difference between life and death in this harsh ancient world. The primitive hunting party set out across the vast savanna, carrying hope and desperation. Fresh animal tracks led toward the distant watering grounds where prey gathered to drink. They moved like shadows across the golden grassland, using ancient stealth and primitive cunning. The watering hole was alive with prey, offering a chance for survival in the harsh wilderness. Ancient instincts guided them to surround their prey using basic coordination and primitive strategy. A simple gesture from the leader unleashed the ancient instincts that drove these primitive hunters forward. Ancient instincts exploded into primitive action as the hunt began, with raw determination and crude weapons. Primitive endurance was their greatest weapon in this ancient chase across the unforgiving savanna landscape. A crude spear throw found its ancient mark, bringing hope of survival to these desperate ancestors. Success brought primitive satisfaction and simple respect for the life taken to sustain their own. Crude stone tools began their ancient work, processing the precious meat with primitive but effective techniques. Simple sharing ensured group survival as the precious meat was distributed among the primitive family. The long journey home began with precious cargo that would feed the tribe through harsh times. Ancient scavengers sensed opportunity, following the primitive hunters across the dangerous prehistoric landscape. Ancient instincts sensed approaching danger as threats gathered behind the primitive hunting party. Prehistoric scavengers closed in on the precious meat, testing the resolve of these ancient ancestors. Instinct formed an ancient circle of protection as the primitive group faced their predatory enemies. Ancient eyes measured ancient courage in a standoff between primitive humans and prehistoric predators. Crude weapons and fierce determination turned the tide of this ancient battle for survival. Ancient courage defeated the pack, leaving one predator behind as a warning to others. Simple victory strengthened their ancient resolve as they continued the dangerous journey toward home. Ancient landmarks welcomed them toward primitive safety as familiar territory came into view at last. Primitive smoke rising in the distance meant family and ancient safety for these weary hunters. Ancient family joy was simple but overwhelming as the successful hunters returned with precious meat. Ancient wisdom guided crude but fair sharing as the bounty was distributed among all family members. Ancient fire knowledge transformed their hunting success into nourishing meals for the primitive community. Ancient cooking knowledge turned raw prey into primitive nourishment using basic techniques and crude methods. Ancient evening brought the family together in simple celebration around the protective fire. Crude sounds and simple gestures passed basic survival knowledge between the primitive generations. Young learned through crude copying and many failures, slowly mastering the skills needed for survival. Primitive fire was their only shield against ancient darkness and the predators that hunted at night. Crude vigilance protected sleeping families from prehistoric predators prowling beyond the firelight. Crude dawn brought another day of primitive survival as the ancient cycle of life continued. Crude tools were shaped through countless failures and primitive persistence, improving with each attempt. Primitive senses read ancient signs of changing seasons with instincts developed over countless generations. Ancient knowledge passed through crude demonstration and primitive copying from elder to youth. Ancient strength grew through crude play and primitive competition among the young members of the tribe. Crude tools were tested through primitive trial and frequent failure until they proved worthy of the hunt. Crude planning happened through primitive sounds and basic gestures as the group prepared for challenges ahead. Ancient resources were gathered through crude selection and primitive recognition of useful materials. Ancient shelter was maintained through crude repair and primitive building techniques learned through experience. Ancient food was preserved through crude methods and frequent spoilage, with success coming through persistence. Ancient water was protected through primitive threats and crude territorial defense against competing animals. Ancient knowledge was taught through crude repetition and primitive demonstration to ensure survival skills continued. Ancient tasks required crude cooperation and primitive group effort to accomplish what individuals could not. Ancient evening brought crude rest and primitive social bonding around the protective warmth of fire. Ancient stars sparked primitive wonder and crude celestial curiosity in these developing minds. Ancient sleep required crude preparation and primitive safety checking to protect against nighttime dangers. Ancient protection required primitive vigilance and crude but constant alertness throughout the dangerous night hours. Ancient sleep brought primitive vulnerability but necessary rest for bodies worn by constant survival struggles. Ancient dawn brought new primitive challenges and crude survival continuation as the cycle began again. Ancient knowledge continued through primitive observation and crude copying as wisdom passed to new generations. Ancient eyes surveyed new territories with primitive curiosity and crude exploration instincts driving them forward. Ancient survival cycle continued through crude hunting preparation and primitive expedition planning for future challenges. Ancient wisdom was earned through crude survival and primitive prehistoric experience carved into weathered faces. Ancient survival required primitive unity and crude but effective community cooperation to face the harsh world. Their primitive legacy became the crude foundation of ancient human survival knowledge that would echo through time.